Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel and welcome to Total War Warhammer. So we're going on to things that are a little bit different in this one. That's mostly the monsters, and monsters actually add a pretty interesting dynamic and element to this game in my opinion. And it is what most dramatically shifts the way the game works. Now spellcasters, yeah, they sort of change things, but they're not too distinct from things like artillery units or stuff like that in their practical effect in a lot of cases, or their buffs are similar to things that we've seen before, or the only thing that's really unique is their ability to assassinate generals as easily as they do. But what we're going to talk about is things like flyers, and that really changes the way the game works. Now, ground-based monsters do change the way the games work, but not as dramatically in my opinion. So we can start off with the lords and stuff like that, and they usually have some options that allow flight. So we can see here they've got things like the Yukitsu, which is flies, and then you've got the Manticore or Hippogriff for the Lord. And then for the Paladin, you've got things like the Royal Pegasus. These flying options for your heroes allow them sort of extra mobility and extra options there. Sometimes they weaken the stats of your units a little bit, but usually they'll increase their charge bonus or something like that. So, for example, we could look at the Hippogriff here. Reduces the armor. And the reason that this happens is that those units become mounted on something that's not armored, so it takes the aggregate between the two, kind of like how the whole unit's hit points are higher. So that's sort of the way that those work. The other thing are the Pegasus Knights here for the Bretonnians. This is a flying cavalry unit, and they act exactly like cavalry that flies, and that means they've got very good charge bonus, decent statistics all around, but they fly. They have the same sort of profile, same sort of statistics as the Knights of the Realm, but you'll notice that they come in a unit of 18, so and they cost 300 more. So that should really tell you how much flight should be valued in this game, actually very, very highly. In fact, their armor is even a little bit lower than the Knights of the Realm. So it's an interesting sort of dynamic that they've got there, where certain units cost way more for that effect. Now, if we look at the hit points for the unit, this is the hit points for the total unit, not each individual, is much, much higher. So they are more durable than they would appear, despite having the 18 men. It takes them a lot longer before they start losing those men. Dwarves over here, all they've got for this sort of thing are the gyrocopters. Interesting ranged unit. They're weaker than your typical artillery pieces. However, they do have the ability to sort of stay out of enemy reach and to evade the enemy to a certain extent there. Greenskins, they've only really got Azag, the Slaughterer, the Orc War Boss for flying heroes, and flyers in general, actually. They have very, very few flying choices. They have got some decent flying, or decent cavalry, though, not flying, wow, monsters. The Trolls, I think, should be used a little bit like shock cavalry to a certain extent, or like elephants or something similar to that. The Giants, same sort of thing, although very, very slow one. Trolls move about as fast as cavalry, a little bit slower than your typical cavalry unit. We can look at most of these here. They've got sort of that sort of 60-ish range, and then you get the really fast cavalry, which has like 90-something. So, barring light cavalry, the Trolls are like the next tier up from that. Giants are sort of completely different scale, but the Ragnarok Spider, for example, pretty similar in terms of speed. All three of these units are very good at breaking through armored units, because almost every monstrous unit has some anti-armor attack. So they're very, very strong, punching through tough elite units or cracking through cavalry or something like that. All of them are very, very good at that. The Trolls obviously are the least good at that. You would use these typically in conjunction with your other units, though, because if they get sort of swarmed, they don't actually have that many hit points. They die pretty quickly. Well, the Giant has a lot of hit points, but he dies surprisingly quickly because of his lack of armor, and the fact that he can be attacked by like 20 different guys at the same time. The Ragnarok Spider, same sort of thing, although it has heavier armor, meaning it tends to last longer in a lot of situations. So these units are very, very good for cracking through elite units, but they need a little bit of support and a little bit of help, much like elite cavalry do. In a lot of fights. So you wouldn't throw elite cavalry against, say, a unit of elite swordsmen or something like that and expect them to necessarily grind it out all that effectively. Same thing goes here. You know, you'd want to tie them up with some infantry and then charge in with the Ragnarok Spider or the Giant or whatever, but in a pinch they do pretty well in those situations. The Empire doesn't have any traditional monsters other than what their generals ride. You can see that General of the Empire has access to the Imperial Griffin or the Pegasus. Balthazar only has the Pegasus. If we go through their hero roster, these guys, the Captain can go on a Pegasus, the Imperial Priest and the Witch Hunter are pretty much stuck on the ground, as are all their wizards. Actually, no, their wizards do have access to the Imperial Pegasus, what am I talking about? So they have flying wizards if they want to. For monsters, I would argue the steam tank is a lot like the Ragnarok spider. It is a very durable unit, punches through things very effectively, very tough, and it's got a decent missile attack as well. So you would use these guys in sort of similar situations, but not expecting it to win as much in melee combat. You'd want to keep it shooting as much as possible as well. It is pretty hard to kill this thing, though. I have a really hard time killing them. So this thing, you just mow over enemy units. It's got huge damage, good armor-piercing damage, and it's pretty much unkillable. This is one of those rare cases that this doesn't need support at all. Like, it just is a tank. Vampire Counts are the premier monster faction. If you go through their roster, like, their generals don't necessarily have the best options for mounts. You've got, like, the Zombie Dragon for the Vampire Lord, and for Manfred von Karstein, you've got the Zombie Dragon. But the only one that can fly is the Vampire from their heroes, and that's only on Hellsteed. It does make the Vampire a surprisingly good assassin, though, because they've got the Lore of Death. It does make them quite good. Down here, we've got their other monsters, though, and this is where they get their strength for the most part, and it's why I think of Undead as the monster faction, and the magic faction, really. They're sort of both of the monsters and magic thing. So they've got Fellbats, which are really, really weak, and again, you can see that sort of comparative weakness there. They have similar stats to a Skeleton, but much higher melee defense and speed, of course, but they fly, and they come in a unit much, much smaller. So for that much smaller unit size, they cost a little bit more and have really bad stats. Direwolves, these things are just cavalry. You'd think of them and use them exactly as you would light, fast cavalry. Crypt Horrors, this is where they kind of come into their own. This is where the undead really shine. Crypt Horrors are basically like trolls in a certain extent. They don't have as much damage, but they have got poisonous attacks, which reduces enemy attacks against them. They got more armor than the basic troll, and they've got like regeneration. They have unbreakable morale. They've got armor-piercing attacks. Like, these guys are just all around really, really tough to deal with a lot of units. A very, very strong unit that you can use to support your zombies or whatever that's is in there, and they'll just start mowing through things. Terrorgeist, or the Vargeist, is a sort of similar deal there, but it flies. It doesn't have the poison attacks or the regeneration, making it much more fragile. But at the same time, it's, you know, got a very, very high weapon strength here. Its armor-piercing damage isn't quite as good, but you can get this into the backline and it causes tremendous havoc. It's one of the best flying units in the game. I would argue they're way better than the Pegasus Knights in many, many situations. The one thing is they don't have as much armor, obviously, and their charge bonus isn't as good, so I'm not sure that they would actually beat Pegasus Knights necessarily, but these things actually deal a ton of damage. They're very, very bulky, so they can get through a lot. The Vargulf is basically a much larger version of the Crypt Horror. It's got sort of the really high stat line that you would expect for a large ground-based monster to have, and it's also got that regeneration, so you can run it in and out of combat and sort of let it regenerate slowly over time. But the last one is the Terrorgeist. Very powerful flying unit. It's got the poisonous attacks again, and it is just an absolute nightmare to fight against in many situations. It's got that additional damage when fighting cavalry, essentially, so you can use this guy to clear out the skies pretty effectively. Very, very strong unit, but it is very expensive and kind of situational, because you don't always need this much power in the air. If you wanted this much power, it's usually more conventional and probably more practical to actually just use Crypt Horrors, honestly. I think that their collective damage is pretty comparable to something like the Terrorgeist for a lot cheaper. It's just that the Terrorgeist is really, really hard to kill, and it also gets around into the back line of enemy units where, you know, they might not be able to protect against something like the Terrorgeist because their big anti-monster units might be busy fighting Crypt Horrors in the front. Lastly, we've got Chaos. They've kind of got a wonky setup here. Their flying generals are their unnamed generals, so, you know, you got the Chaos Lords and the Chaos Sorcerer Lords. They can all be on flying mounts. They're either Chaos Dragons or Manticores. They've got their heroes here. The Exalted hero is the only one that can fly, the Manticore there. If we look at the Lore of Metal, or Lore of Death, regular Sorcerer, they've just got regular steeds they've got access to, so it doesn't really help them all that much in that sense. But they have got a good list of monsters and beasts here. We've got the Chaos Warhounds, which are pretty mediocre. They're just, again, the fast cavalry type of thing, but unlike the undead ones, they can be broken with morale. You've got the Chaos Trolls, same as the Orcish ones, except they've got an armored variant, which is pretty good. They've got the Chaos Spawn, which I really like. These guys are an anti-infantry damage dealer, but they've got unbreakable morale, so they will stick through a fight really, really well. The only problem is that they die pretty quickly because of their lack of armor, and their unit size means that people can sort of surround them and start killing them pretty quickly. Chaos Giant, same sort of thing as the Orcish Giant. Just get in there, start smashing things, support it with some stuff to keep it from getting surrounded too badly, and it'll deal some pretty good damage just swinging its big club around there. Dragon Ogres, again, this is just a heavy cavalry unit. There's really nothing else to it. Only comes in a unit of 9. They've got really good damage, really high attack. One of the interesting things about them, though, is that they're not actually that much higher damage than the much, much larger unit that you get of Chaos Knights with Lances or Chaos Knights. So, honestly, the Dragon Ogres are kind of like, bleh, they're not really my favorite unit. What's nice about these guys is that they do cause fear. So it does reduce enemy leadership, but it's not really worth it because you'll usually have a general on something that causes fear anyway. Lastly, you've got the Dragon Ogre Sheoth, and this is sort of their comparative version of something like the Arachnarok Spider. Honestly, it's a little bit too expensive. The reason that it is what it is that it's very, very fast for one of those. It's faster than a lot of cavalry options. If we were to look at, for example, the Chaos Knights, it's faster than the Chaos Knights. So, it's not faster than these Marauders, but that they're light cavalry, so you'd expect them to be faster. But honestly, I don't think the Dragon Ogre Sheoth should be quite as expensive as it is because it's not as good as something like the Arachnarok Spider or the Steam Tank, and it's sort of priced in that same sort of category. It's just not quite as good as them. Nothing really stands out about it. So that's kind of all of the monsters in the game. Now, the flyers are interesting in this, and they're most prevalent, again, for the vampire counts. But again, also Bretonnia tends to take a lot of them. But you've got units that are not necessarily high value in terms of their stat line, but their ability to change the way the battles play out is enormous, and that's really what they pay for. And being able to fly into the middle of for example, an engaged box formation. Let's say you're fighting a typical sort of like noob box, even though people aren't going to noob box that much in this game because it's not got pikes. But let's say that someone's doing that sort of strategy, say with the really tough dwarves. You can just fly the Terrorgeist or Vargeist or whatever, like right into the middle of that box once it's engaged, and slug it out with them from the inside and cause a lot of panic to those units. Now, these guys will die very quickly if you do that because their leadership is going to plummet from being surrounded, but they'll be able to cause a lot of damage and havoc on the inside there. So let's go ahead and try out a battle here. I mean, it is very interesting, the dynamic and sort of the meta shifts that seem to be happening very rapidly around flyers, because you can either take lots of flyers or you can take no flyers, but you always need something that can fight flyers. It's kind of a mess in that sort of sense there. We'll play with vampire counts again just because they're the ones that have the monsters. I think that that's a reasonable sort of way of looking at things. So let's go ahead and pick the vampire counts. Scrap all that. We'll go ahead and pick Manfred von Karstein. Zombie Dragon. We could get more flyers by taking the Vampire again, but we're not going to since we're highlighting monsters this time. We still want to have a bit of a ground force available, though, so we'll go ahead and take... oh, okay. We'll want to take, for example, like zombies to just tie up elements of the enemy army or whatever, but we'll also want like Grave Guard, which can tank out a lot longer. You could use normal Grave Guard in certain situations as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and pick vampire counts. We're up against the Empire. Now the Empire is interesting because they've got really strong anti-monster options, so it could be dangerous doing this. I don't feel like I need to have too much armor penetration because they don't have too much armor. And what we're going to use if they do have armor is the Crypt Horrors. So we can tie them up using zombies and then attack them in that way. We can actually get rid of one of them, I think. We'll go ahead and take some Vargeists. We'll need some of the Black Knights as well, just in case my opponent has like a Luminarch that's quite effective at hunting down the Luminarch of Heish. And we can afford a Vargulf, it looks like. So we'll go ahead and get one of those and we'll get 2 more zombies. So this is a very monster-heavy force. It's not what I would normally want to take, but, you know, it is what we're taking. So we'll see how this works out for us, but, you know, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. One of the nice things about this game is that there is that wide variety of different strategies that you can take because of the new elements, but at the same time, some of them I don't feel are necessarily as effective. Monsters is one of those things that I don't feel is necessarily more effective, especially for the non-undead factions. Like, undead can get away with monsters, but I don't feel like everyone else can. Demigryph Knights are actually quite scary. I don't have any great options against them right now other than the Crypt Horrors, and even then, they can get bogged down and killed by things like Demigryph Knights pretty badly. Like, these guys are really, really powerful. You can almost think of them as like monsters, but they are again, conventional cavalry in a very strong sense. And since monsters basically acts a lot like cavalry anyway, I guess there's no real point in making that distinction. Hopefully my opponent doesn't have too many like rockets or something like that. That would be awful. All right. Interesting map here. Relatively flat, so appreciate that to a certain extent. But it does give the Empire player pretty good shooting lanes. Well, this is slightly odd. Alright, so when the number jumps in the waiting thing, it tends to mean something's happened, so hopefully something's happening. Alright, there we go. Right, so you can take an entire monster list. I have seen it done, but I don't find it to be very effective. Typically, like, monsters in conjunction with infantry works a little bit better, just because monsters, like, they don't work perfectly like cavalry, and cavalry in this game I find is a little bit weaker than it is in something like Total War Rome or Total War Attila, or even Shogun 2. I find that, like, cav spam just isn't a thing that's happening at all in this game so far. It might start happening later, but for now I think we're seeing it not being really a thing. No, I should fight the Demigryph Knights with the Vargulf probably, if I can. It is fast enough that I could probably catch them. Alright, and of course I can also use magic against it, but like, Empire has really good assassination options, so it's not necessarily safe to try and is that no, it's a steam tank. Okay, good. Who's that up there? It's probably Carl Friends. Alright, so let's go ahead and start getting up there. Demigryph Knights with halberds. Oh, I don't want to fight them with my monsters. Alright. Well, we're gonna have to anyway, so. Just gonna start working on their general. We can bog down his units with our zombies here. That would be ideal. But even my Graveguard can do okay against his Demigryph Knights with the halberds. Not great, of course, but, like, he can do okay. Alright, so what can we do here? Alright. Alright, let's just get back, I guess. We'll switch to Necromancy, and we'll go ahead and Invocation of Nehek to replenish my general's health a bit. Especially because we're getting shot by the steam tank a little bit still. Alright. So let's march you guys into these spears here. Actually, no, we'll not. We'll keep these guys around our flanks. The one thing that I'm worried about is that our... Oh. Man, this is laggy today. Terrible connection or something. Alright. Demigryph Knights are engaged, so we'll start charging in some monstrous creatures against it. Oh, these guys need to be further back. Let's get a charge in against these guys, maybe. Just tie them up a little bit there. Alright, looks like his demigryphs on that other side are going to start coming in. Let's actually see if that works against the steam tank. I don't know if it does. Alright, so it looks like he's fallen for that bait. Alright. Now you can see the wavering in my units a little bit, but that doesn't actually matter in this particular case, so we're going to ignore it for the most part. Alright. These terrorgeists out of here. Let's bring them around behind, actually, if I can. I wonder if I've got any Lore of Death spells ready yet. Not quite. Okay. Alright. Oops, shit. That was the wrong Cryptoris. Alright, I need to do something about the steam tank, so I'm going to keep hitting it with this thing. Looks like we've sort of gotten through most of their front line, though. Where's my Vargulf? There it is. You know what, let's just have it kill the steam tank. That way I can focus my spells on these Demigryph Knights, which are sort of irritating me. Let's get these Demigryph Knight halberds over here. And you can see that these Demigryph Knights with the halberd... Oh, those ones are shot cavalry ones. Well, that's dangerous. There we go. Unit has been wiped out. No surprise there. Alright, let's look at the siege tank fighting the Vargulf. You can see that the Vargulf actually got knocked over a couple times there. Yeah, I need to get this in the fight now. Let's get Manfred over here. Vargulf is doing a pretty decent job here. The nice thing is that, you know, since it does have more speed than the steam tank, it can keep up with it pretty effectively. If I can destroy it, we're going to be in a pretty good place.
I will not fail. So it is.
Alright. Those guys have fled. Vargulf has just about killed the steam tank here. Kind of ignoring what's going on elsewhere, but what else happening elsewhere doesn't really matter that much. It's just fun watching the steam tank explode when it finally does, but I like how my Vargulf got knocked in some Demigryph Knights there. I'm surprised that didn't kill it. It's tanking through these like a champ. Jeez, there we go. Alright, perfect. Let's take a look at the stat screen for a little bit here. So those monsters are like really heavy hitting, and they can be durable under certain circumstances, definitely. But you can definitely see that they can get knocked down pretty quickly, especially the flying ones. And this particular one wasn't the great highlight of flyers because there wasn't really a whole lot of situations where I needed them. There were a couple times where I flew back behind the spearmen and then charged them from the rear with the Vargeist, but realistically that wasn't a situation where they came in too handy. It was very nice, though, to have Manfred von Karstein in the air. You'll notice that the only thing that could attack it was the steam tank, and it wasn't really doing much damage because the steam tank's anti-air gun is just really, really weak. It's not the same as the cannon that had that really high damage profile. So you can just keep your flyers hovering above an enemy that doesn't have any counter flyers. Karl Franz probably thought that he might be able to assassinate Manfred, but that really wasn't the case in this particular instance. You just have to not land with your guys, and they'll eventually sort of win out there. You can see the effectiveness of those Graveguard against those Spearmen. They just had no hope whatsoever against those Graveguard. Cryptors getting pretty good kills. They're fighting mostly Demigryph Knights and stuff like that. The Vargulf only got one kill, which I'm pretty sure was actually the steam tank, but it was doing a lot of damage to those Demigryph Knights as well, so yeah, it was a pretty interesting battle. So anyway, that's a sort of brief look at sort of monsters and flyers. Typically you won't focus on them quite as much as this unless you're playing vampire counts where it's viable, but most factions have and take some monsters, and they're very effective, and they're a very good addition to any typical army. So anyway, I hope you found this video enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you all next time.